Hello, this is Randy I back with another video about the layers of reality. And specifically today, I'm going to focus on asset classes and different types of assets within different layers of reality. So there's going to be a very strong economics perspective to the video today. For those of you who are not familiar with the terminology I'm about to use, please watch my video on the layers of reality explained. But to summarize very quickly, we have the primary layer of reality, which is grounded on physical reality in the real world. We have secondary reality, which is the reality of social constructs and ideas. The tertiary reality, which is that which we have created since the dawn of the internet, which is the digital world. And then quaternary reality is a future, a speculative layer of reality that doesn't currently exist, but it has to do with linking of the mind, singularity, collective consciousness, and a technological overlay that's directly connected to the brain. All of this is explained in my previous video. But today I'm focusing on economics, and specifically I want to explore different asset classes within different layers of reality. And more specifically, I'm focusing today on appreciating assets. So there's a difference between appreciating assets and depreciating assets. And some assets presumably don't appreciate or depreciate, but most assets will either appreciate or depreciate in value. A very common example of a depreciating asset would be a car, right? Most cars, not all cars, but most cars will depreciate. The moment you drive it off the lot, it will lose some of its value because next year there's going to be a new model of the same car, and that's going to replace the current car. So if you buy a 2024 Honda Civic, next year there's going to be a 2025 Honda Civic and a 2026 Honda Civic the year after that. So this asset depreciates in value. Your 2024 Honda Civic in 10 years is going to be worth a lot less than the market price of which you bought it. This is same for clothes, for example. Most clothes, some very specialty clothing items may appreciate, but most clothes will depreciate to almost no value at a certain point. If you buy a t-shirt or a pair of pants or a dress or a belt today, if you were to try to sell that on the secondary market, good luck, right? That's yard sale stuff. So again, clothes, most things in life, most items and most assets actually depreciate. But today we're focusing on assets that appreciate. And of the assets that appreciate, I can, or asset classes that appreciate, I can categorize them into the following groups. So we have real estate, right? So real estate is houses, land. So we have real estate, we have stocks, shares of companies, stocks and shares. We have crypto, right? Cryptocurrency, that's an asset class. We have precious metals, gold, silver, and of course precious stones like diamonds and other types of hard assets that relate to stones and to crystals and items that exist naturally within the earth. There are other asset classes, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to focus today's video on real estate, precious metals and stones, on stocks and shares, and on crypto. So I'm focusing on these four asset classes for the purposes of this video. Again, this is not to say there are not other assets that appreciate. For example, fine art is an asset class that often can appreciate. Not all art appreciates, but fine art can appreciate. So if I have time, I may integrate that into today's video. But that's an asset class that certain collectibles appreciate. If you think of a really rare baseball card or a really rare collectible card or collectible item, those can appreciate in value over time. But predominantly, the big four would be real estate, precious metals, stocks, and more recently, crypto. These assets can also be found within different layers of reality. They actually don't exist within the same layer. Real estate is predominantly grounded in primary reality, in the real world, the physical world. Prior to civilization, there was still, at least in some tribes, some concept of ownership and some concept of land ownership. Now, this could differ between tribes. Some tribes were, back in the day, I'm talking about 10,000 years ago, some tribes would have been more nomadic, and maybe they didn't have a sense of ownership. But there would have been other tribes that had sense of ownership. Now, it wouldn't have been real estate in our sense of the word, right? There wouldn't have been, a title or, title searches and title insurance and legal mechanisms to justify a particular ownership of a piece of land. That came later upon the secondary layer of reality, where we created these laws and rules and then policies to justify, enforce, and create parameters around who owns what. But in primary reality, there is still a sense of ownership that this thing or this place is mine or is my home. You can't say that ancient people didn't have a sense of this is my home or this is my land. I don't think that's an accurate statement, that they didn't have a sense of ownership, or at the very least, a sense of exclusion in that, hey, this piece of property is mine and you can't come here, at least not without my consent. I think all humans fundamentally have some sense of exclusion, that this is mine, this is my possession, and you can't touch it or come on here or walk in without some level of consent or knowledge from me. I think fundamentally we don't need laws and policies per se to dictate that. I think emotionally and at a very fundamental human level, we all have this sense of, hey, this is mine, and you're excluded from this. Now, of course, we can share, but I think you get my point. So real estate is grounded on primary reality. This is the layer. So it's one of the, it is the oldest layer. So real estate is a hard asset, right? It exists in the physical world. Another type of asset that exists within the physical world would be precious metals, gold, silver, and again, precious stones like diamonds. They exist in the physical world. You don't, now, of course, we assign value to gold and silver. Their utility is questionable outside of the value we assign to gold and silver, but they are themselves physical entities. They're hard assets grounded in primary reality, in the real world. If we look then at secondary reality, then we're looking at something like stocks, right? Stocks are shares of a company, right? A share being that you have an ownership right and an ownership interest in a company. Fundamentally, that's what stocks are. If you want to understand the fundamentals of stocks, Warren Buffett has some great writing about fundamentals, right? What is it that you're buying when you buy a stock? You're buying a share or an ownership interest in a company, fundamentally speaking. Of course, there are now very fancy financial products and derivatives out in the market where you're not even sure if you're buying the underlying asset in some way because the products have become so complicated. But to simplify the matter, you're buying a share of a company and ownership interest. And this is a product of secondary reality, right? This is a product of a social construct we created, but it doesn't require any digital interface, right? Stocks and shares existed in the 1600s, right? In the 1700s, right? The first shares of companies or proto companies, right? They weren't the companies that we imagine today in the 1600s and 1700s, when predominantly European civilizations were experimenting with early stages of capitalism. There was companies that you could own a piece of ownership of, right? So the masses, not everyone, but so I would be wrong to say the masses in the sense that it was entirely democratized, but a particular class of people, predominantly aristocratic people, could own an ownership interest in a company and the ventures of that company. Most of the times, unfortunately, it was a company that engaged in some kind of colonial activity, but you could engage and share the risk and the rewards of that company's ventures. So the Hudson Bay Company is a very old company that was involved in the fur trade, right? So that was one of the first companies. The Dutch East India Company, right? These were sort of like proto companies. They weren't exactly the companies, again, that we see today in the same form, with the same board of directors, with the same rules, with the same type of shares and share classes. but they were sort of proto companies that groups of people could somehow be involved in the sharing of the risk and the rewards of the ventures of these organizations, by way of a grant or a purchase of some ownership right within these organizations. And there of course were many others as capitalism took flight in the 1700s, the 1800s, and there were these companies that you could, not the everyday person, but a certain group of people could partake in. And all of this is part of the social construct we created in the secondary layer. The stock markets now are predominantly electronic, right? You use your electronic database and platforms to access the stock market. But at one point is all paper. So the stock market, it can exist quite independently of the internet. It doesn't need the internet to exist, because it's a secondary layer concept. It's a human construct. It's artificial in that we created it, but it's more of a legal concept rather than a technological concept. Now, as we move into the tertiary layer, we're looking at assets like crypto, right? Cryptocurrencies cannot exist without the internet. They just cannot. The stock market can exist without the internet. Real estate can't exist without the internet, and precious metals and fine art and collectibles, they can all exist without the internet. But at the tertiary layer, now we have the creation of some assets that cannot exist in previous layers. In the same way that the stock market and shares and ownership rights of companies cannot exist at the primary layer, right? Hunter-gatherers and early agrarian people didn't have the stock market, and you didn't own shares of companies living in ancient Egypt, right? They had different ways of organizing themselves. But that's or if you're thinking of more ancient people, hunter-gatherers living in the Neolithic times, they had no concept of a stock market. That wasn't a thing. We created that. So that is a product of secondary reality, or the secondary layer of reality. In the primary layer, the stock market cannot exist, because it's not based on anything physical, unlike precious metals or real estate. In the same way, by way of analogy, cryptocurrencies exist completely and solely and exclusively within the tertiary. I have sometimes trouble pronouncing that word. Tertiary layer of reality, which is that they are completely digital assets, and the underlying fundamentals behind crypto is just digital code, right? You could say that the fundamentals behind stocks and shares are companies, right? Or essentially organizations of people, I guess that you could say that fundamentally they're organizations of people and their activities, and the concepts that tie all of those people and those activities together, forming a company. Because what is a company? It's people and their activities. And I guess a lot of companies have physical space nowadays. That may not even be necessary for some companies, but people and activities. So that's what's tying the shares to some fundamental reality. But cryptocurrency, what's behind Bitcoin, right? Beyond digital code and some consensus that it's worth something, there is nothing fundamentally behind it. If you strip Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana, or Cardano or whatever, some of the big 10 market cap cryptos right now, if you strip them of their sort of consensus value that we collectively have agreed that there is some type of value, there's nothing fundamentally behind all of these crypto assets. Now, it's not to say they don't have utility, right? I think blockchain is highly innovative, and it's not to say that there's no utility. So I'm not saying that there's no utility behind the use, but there's fundamentally they are attached to the digital world. That there's nothing in the primary reality like real estate that it's attached to. Bitcoin exists solely in a different portal. It's not physical in any way, and there's nothing physical about it, and it's sort of 2 steps removed from the physical world. I should add again that we're talking here about appreciating assets, right? We're not talking about any assets that are depreciating. So that's why I'm talking about real estate, precious metals, stocks, and crypto, because generally these are appreciating assets, in that if you were to purchase these assets now, it's likely that someone else may purchase these assets at a higher price in the future. Therefore, they go up in value over a period of time. That's what I mean by appreciating assets. I just want to be very clear that we're talking about appreciating assets and not the entire world of available assets. What other digital assets exist in the tertiary reality world? To some extent, domains, right? To some extent, internet domains are property, in that if you buy a domain, someone else may buy it at a higher price, especially if it's a very good domain. That could be an asset. Remember, the fundamental proposition here is scarcity, right? That's the fundamental economic proposition, is that appreciating assets are generally scarce, that there's only so much of it. Real estate is an appreciation. I'm having a lot of trouble pronouncing that word today. I apologize. Real estate is generally an appreciating asset because it's scarce, in that there is only so much of it in the world. You can't create more land. You can build up. You have condos and apartments you can build up, but you can't create more land. Fundamentally, there's only so much land on the earth. I mean, Dubai and Abu Dhabi and those places, they tried creating artificial islands, but it's fundamentally very expensive. China created artificial islands, obviously for different purposes. That's mostly for political and military purposes. But people in the Middle East, I mean, the rich emirate countries, tried to create artificial islands. So technically speaking, you could create more land, but if it's not necessarily sustainable, there is only so much space at the very least. In the world. So land is scarce. Gold is scarce. There's only so much gold. Gold is an element, right? AU is its symbol on the periodic table. There's only so much gold in the world on Earth. Maybe we'll mine more of it in space, right? Maybe we'll mine an asteroid. But on Earth, there is only so much of it. There's some level of scarcity, although I know this is debatable, because with stocks and shares, the company can technically dilute the share base and create more more stocks at will by way of a vote of the board of directors. But fundamentally speaking, at its simplest level, there is an assumption of scarcity in stocks and shares, that there's only so many shares of a company that circulates. So there's some level of scarcity. Although in modern day capitalism, a lot of companies have mechanisms to dilute shares and do share splits so that more shares are sort of created out of thin air. It's very questionable. but if you were to simplify the matter, there's some idea that there's scarcity there. And of course, with assets like Bitcoin, there's only so many Bitcoins that can be created. I think 21 million is the answer. So there is some fundamental scarcity. With some of the other crypto assets like Ethereum, Solana, Cardano, Polygons, there's a whole bunch. I'm not going to list all of them. There are some elements of scarcity depending on how these crypto assets are designed, and some may not be as scarce because you can just create more of them. So I think it really depends on the actual crypto asset we're talking about. But fundamentally, Bitcoin is scarce, or it's designed to be scarce, and that you can only have so much of it, and it becomes harder and harder and harder to mine. Now, those are sort of the big asset classes as they exist within different layers of reality. Let's talk about some interesting implications, which is what is going to be the next big asset class within quaternary reality, right? When we are all telepathic and connected with our minds to each other, where there's collective consciousness and singularity, there will be some new asset class in quaternary reality that has no basis in primary and perhaps even no basis in secondary reality, right? It will be just its new asset class. It could be something based on attention, right? If we're connected, in the mind telepathically, and just always plugged in, attention is going to be a very rare resource. So the new asset class, I believe, will be related to attention, to how much attention you have, how much attention you give. We can probably commodify attention. We already do to a certain extent, right? They say that we're moving from an oil-based economy to an attention-based economy, even in the tertiary layer. If you think of Google, Facebook, Meta, how do they make money? Right? These big Fortune 500 companies, these big behemoth companies with billions of dollars, they rely on your attention, your eyeballs, because they sell advertising to you. And they rely on your attention to sell the advertising. You are not the client, you are the product. Remember that. You are not the client of these companies, you are the product. You are what they are selling to their clients, who are the companies that are using these platforms to advertise to you. And they're taking your personal information and selling it. So you're the product. And your attention, essentially, is what they're selling, your eyeballs. Not physically, just metaphorically. Well, not physically yet, maybe one day if there's some organ harvesting, but metaphorically, your attention is what's being sold. So in the quaternary layer of reality, where we are all connected using telepathy, collective consciousness, a very robust metaverse in quaternary reality, which again is speculative, but I think it's going to happen within the next 10 or 20 years. There's probably going to be a new form of asset. And I bet it's going to be attention-based. I don't know what it's going to be yet. In the same way that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, a lot of people would not have foreseen crypto take off in this way. But it did. So it's hard to say what this asset class will be. But there will be something that is scarce. And there will be something that will appreciate within quaternary reality. And I think it's going to be a new asset class, something that doesn't exist in the world now. So that's one implication. Also, I'm thinking about what makes something appreciate. Why is it that certain people will buy this thing that you have at a higher value, at a higher price later on over time. I condense it down to 3 characteristics. Scarcity, which we've already talked about. There's only so much of it. Utility, it should have some level of use. And desirability. So scarcity is just, it's rare. There's not infinite amounts of it, and it's rare. It's scarce, right? Most appreciating assets, if not all appreciating assets, will carry the element and the characteristic of scarcity. Utility is that it should have some level of use. No, some of these assets are more useful than others. I mean, the classic example is gold, right? You can't eat gold. You can't use it to house you. You can't wear it. Well, you can as a ring, but it's not like clothes. So it has limited utility from an industrial perspective, but we assign value to it. So that's a classic example of gold, say, versus real estate, which has a lot of utility, right? Housing yourself, sheltering yourself has a lot of utility. Stocks and shares, beyond trading it and perhaps getting dividends, really not a lot of utility, right? You can't eat it. You can't do much with it beyond having it appreciate so you can sell it at a higher value. Or if the shares pay dividends, then you're getting monthly or yearly returns or quarterly returns. But as you move again away from primary reality, there's less and less utility, right? Bitcoin and crypto assets. I mean, there's again, you can't eat it. You can't use it for shelter. It exists in the digital world. Is there any utility to it? There's some utility. Obviously, you can earn an interest from it, right? You can stake it. A lot of the cryptos you can stake, so there's some utility. You can trade with it. You can buy things. At least nowadays, you can buy things with crypto. A lot of vendors will have crypto interface, crypto options. There's some element of utility, but it's also limited. And so utility is important. And again, with these assets, the primary reality assets like real estate have, I'd say, more utility than secondary and tertiary assets that tend to, they're liquid assets in that you can buy and sell them, but they tend to be lacking in sort of absolute utility. But it's not to say they don't have utility. So you need some element of utility, and then you need some element of desirability, which is, I think, the third characteristic. That you can have things that are scarce and things that are useful, but people need to want them. And if nobody wants them, if no one in the future actually wants this, then I don't think it appreciates. It either stays stagnant or it depreciates. So some element of desirability is an important characteristic. Because again, for an asset to appreciate, someone else must be willing to buy it from you in the future for a higher price, right? Otherwise, it's not appreciating. Otherwise, it stays stagnant or it depreciates. So that's another implication. And the third implication, as I'm talking about this and just thinking about this concept philosophically, is that at each level of reality, new assets are sort of native to that level of reality. We talked about real estate and precious metals being sort of more native to primary reality, in that ancient people had gold coins, right? They traded with gold coins and had houses. Ancient people did, right? Ancient civilizations, they had these things. They didn't have crypto. They didn't have the stock market. And once we got deeper into secondary reality, we invented things like the stock market, we invented things like bonds, right? And sort of credit instruments and different types of financial instruments. Insurance, right? Insurance existed before the internet. That was a secondary invention, or an invention of secondary reality. Insurance products, right? These sort of risk products. By way of an insurance policy, these are secondary reality products, And tertiary reality obviously has digital assets like crypto, but also domains, right? Domains, I mentioned domains, and to a certain extent, like a Google Maps page, right? That's a virtual property. So there's value to a Google Maps page. My law firm has a Google Maps page that generates clients. So there's actually monetary value. So some companies, when they sell their business, they're selling their digital footprint. So they're actually selling the website, and they're selling the digital footprint, the domain, the website, the social media pages, the Google Maps page. That's what they're selling, because that actually has value. It's what I call digital real estate. There's actually some monetary value, but these pages don't exist in the real world. In fact, I actually think the digital Google Maps page of my law firm is probably worth more than the physical office, which is strange for me to say. But if I were to put a value on the Google Maps page, I would say it's actually worth more than the physical in terms of what it's doing for my business and how many clients it's generating on a yearly basis. I would say it's worth more than actually the physical office that we occupy, which is crazy for me to say, but I think it's true. And that if I were to sell one or the other, one would actually at fair market value be worth more than the other. So that's just my assessment. There's a lot of really interesting digital assets within tertiary reality, right? There you hear about people buying real estate within video games. I recall watching a documentary of one person who bought, I think in Second Life or one of these big multiplayer video games, a piece of real estate that doesn't have any link to primary reality. It's just a digital piece of real estate, a digital land within the video game. Quite risky, right? If nobody plays the video game, then your piece of digital land has no value. But if everybody plays a video game, then you could parse it out. You may sell it. Who knows? NFTs, right? Really fascinating, right? Non-fungible tokens, really fascinating. If that takes off, and you have these asset classes that are sort of analogous. It's sort of the NFTs are at its most basic level, at least of current versions. Now you can probably or tokenize anything they say these days, but at least the first iteration, it was mostly digital art, so they were sort of electronic versions of appreciating art pieces. Now, of course, most of the NFTs ended up depreciating because it was more of a hype, but who knows? Maybe they'll make a comeback. This is 2024. Anything can happen in the future. But these are some of the digital assets that would never have existed without the internet, right? They're native to the internet, like Google Maps pages, domain names, NFTs, cryptocurrencies. These are assets, some of which are appreciating assets that exist solely within tertiary reality. They just don't exist anywhere else, but they're assets and they're worth money, and there's utility and there's desirability and they're scarce. So it's fascinating. This is why tertiary reality it's a portal. And I say this in my very first video that the internet is not just a tool, it's a portal into a different level of reality that is very different from what we're used to. And as we move into quaternary reality, there's going to be assets of the mind. Right, it's going to be a brave new world out there. Props to Aldous Huxley, who is one of my favorite authors. He coined the word "brave new world." Actually, he didn't. Brave new world was actually something that one of the Shakespeare characters states in the Shakespeare play *The Tempest*. I forget which character says "brave new world," but actually Aldous Huxley takes the term "brave new world" from Shakespeare, and then popularized it in the book Brave New World. So we are moving quite quickly into that direction. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts today. That's my my philosophical stream of conscious thoughts on the economics of different layers of reality and in assets that exist within these layers of reality. Very, very fascinating. Look out for new asset classes as well. Because when Bitcoin first came out, a lot of people were skeptical, and then the price went to the moon. So, when quaternary reality becomes a thing, be vigilant and look for some of these assets that fit the characteristic of scarcity, utility, and desirability, because there's going to be some new asset class, and if you're vigilant and you pay attention, you may be the first. Hopefully, I will be one of the first to capitalize on some of these assets that don't yet exist, and that will be very exciting because hey, everyone loves getting rich. And on that note, thank you for joining me today. Do not forget to like and subscribe. I hope you get very, very rich because everybody deserves it. Have a wonderful day. I will talk to you soon in the next video.